As Nigeria targets a historic inflation drop and ambitious reforms, will 2025 be the year of economic breakthroughs or, well, you fill in the gap? Good morning, Happy New Year, and welcome to the first business week of 2025. This year kicks off with Nigeria's President Tinubu setting an ambitious target to tame inflation, vowing to slash it from 34.6% to 15% by tackling food and manufacturing costs. Nigeria's telecom operators are ringing alarm bells, threatening service cuts if tariffs remain unchanged, while MTN bids farewell to the Republic of Guinea, selling its operations to the government in that country in the deal that's making waves. And globally, the US takes a hard line, blocking Nippon Steel's $15 billion bid for US Steel, and China dazzles with a satellite breakthrough that could fast-track the 6G revolution. In today's deep dive, we're charting the course for Nigeria's economy in 2025 with Ugodre Obichukwu and Ola Oladele. From bold reforms to untapped opportunities, we'll connect the dots on what the new year holds for businesses and households. Buckle up. It's time to catch up on the stories you missed during the week and the stories that could define the year ahead. I'm Rolake Akikwe-Fulani, and it feels good to be back. Stay tuned. As always, we start with a look at global energy commodities. After a not-so-bullish end to the year 2024, Brent was up at the last day of trading during the week, up by 0.57%. WTI was also up by 0.9%. Natural gas is down 7.7%, and there's a big gas story coming up a bit later in the show. RBOB gasoline was up by 0.46%. Let's take a look at equity markets. Of course, the all-share index in Nigeria has done pretty well in, year-to-date growth of almost 40% in 2024. End of day of trading, a fairly buoyant note there at 0.39%. Over 13,000 deals. That's one of the highest I've seen in a day of trading in recent times. Volumes of shares traded 709.2 million, value of 8.24 billion, and equity capitalization on the market at 63.1 trillion naira. Let's look at Europe, or Africa first, before Europe. The home turf, Johannesburg, was up at the end of trading by 0.3%. Ghana was also up by 0.04%. And it was a green sweep all around for the key African exchanges, Casablanca and Nairobi, also ending the week on a bullish note. Now to Europe. Let's see. It was a red sweep all the way. So not a great first week of trading on European markets. Euro Stoxx 600 was down by 0.4%. Of course, some bearish notes there in some of the key stocks, including insurance stocks in across Europe, especially on the FTSE all-share index in London. Paris was also down by 1.36%. Of course, the French economy and political scene has been facing a lot of turbulence in recent times. Germany was also down, ending the Friday week trading down by 0.56%. Now, of course, to my top picks from around the world. And it's good news for a West African country, Senegal, with Q3 year-on-year growth in Senegal for 2024 coming in at 11.4% on the back of first oil from that country from the Sangoma field, which will be producing oil and gas. Now, it's being operated by a company called Woodside Energy, and the first 100,000 barrels a day have been going through and contributing to the boost in revenues for the Senegal government. So this is a really major piece of news for the country. The IMF is already predicting an average of 9.3% growth in Senegal this year, 2025, as a result of new oil production from the country. Of course, other countries in the region, newer oil producers like Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, will be watching this very closely. And the government intends to use this newfound revenue base for investment in infrastructure, social infrastructure, urban infrastructure, and other types of physical infrastructure. Good news for the relatively new government of Bassirou Faye in that country. Well, on hydrocarbons still, Russia and Ukraine have ended 5 decades of gas transit to Europe. Now, there are no real winners here at all. But what is interesting is that this commercial agreement has been on alongside the brewing Russia-Ukrainian conflict, which means even politics and wars can't trump commercial imperatives. Now, what this means is that Ukraine will no longer be the transit point for gas supplies from Russia to Europe. Gazprom itself, the Russian state-owned gas company, will be losing almost $5 billion in revenue as a result of the end of this agreement, while Ukraine will lose around $1 billion worth of transit fees as the agreement lapses. Now, what does this mean for the rest of Europe? Obviously, Europe has been trying to ramp up LNG production in places like Norway and elsewhere, and looking to supplies from the US to make up for the lost gas supplies as a result of the end of this agreement. So it will probably influence a bit of the politics of the EU, and more importantly, may actually play into the dynamics of the protracted Russia-Ukrainian conflict. Of course, Europe will have to reassess the entire energy security issue, because we expect gas prices in the EU to go up by about 10 to 15% as a result of the end of this agreement. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Biden, of course, this has been big news all week. US President Joe Biden has blocked the $15 billion acquisition of US steel by Japan's Nippon Steel. Now, Nippon Steel is not taking it lying down. It says that it's going to go to court because this move violates the tenets of international trade. Well, good luck to Nippon Steel. Very hard to take on the U.S. in international legal trade wars. But the U.S. government is adamant that it wants to protect U.S. jobs, steel jobs, industrial jobs, manufacturing, and such a strategic asset should not be sold to Nippon, especially because it is also worried about things like industrial espionage and the safety of U.S. national, the sanctity of national security in the U.S. So Biden blocks what would have been quite a major deal. In fact, Nippon still said the acquisition would have allowed it to invest an additional $3 billion in the U.S. economy, in the steel manufacturing sector, but that obviously wasn't enough to sway the U.S. government's move. MTN is exiting the Republic of Guinea in West Africa and selling its business there to the Guinean government, citing operational challenges and currency volatility. Of course, the Guinean franc has been relatively volatile and also been depreciating vis-a-vis the US dollar. MTN says it wants to focus on high growth markets that have huge growth potential and more attractive demographics. Of course, we've been following a lot around the telecoms tariffs issue here in Nigeria and other parts of the African continent. We'll be talking about telecoms a bit later in the show. And finally, the Chinese have landed a major breakthrough in satellite to ground laser comms. Now, this could really become a game changer for the 6G space across the globe and really position China as a formidable challenger to the US in the area of ICT. What does this all mean? It means that potentially we could see data transmission at ultra high speeds. And we're talking, according to the experts, around 100 gigabytes per second, which would be really revolutionary, not just for China, but for the entire ICT space. Of course, the US government is worried about China's domination of the technology and ICT space and the implications that might have for other types of concerns, which we all know too well, such as spying and espionage and whatnot. You can't divorce big global technology moves like this from the geopolitics of the world. But interesting development there for China. And that's it for my top picks from around the world for the past week. And now for some other top stories from around the world. First, interesting story. The shares of European and American spirits makers and brewers fell on Friday after a U.S. Surgeon General called for cancer warnings on the labels of alcoholic drinks. The consumption of alcoholic drinks increases the risk of developing breast, colon, liver, and other cancers, U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy said in an advisory. It is unclear when or if the Surgeon General's suggestions will be implemented. The decision to update the labels will ultimately be made by the U.S. Congress. Chinese President Xi Jinping once again stated that no one can stop the reunification of China with Taiwan. He called this event inevitable, according to Reuters report. In his New Year's speech late last year, Xi stated that the reunification of China with Taiwan is inevitable. He added that people on both sides should be united by a common goal and share the glory of the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. After South Korea ordered an inspection of all 737-800 aircraft, the model involved in a fatal Jeju air crash last year, operated by its domestic carriers, Boeing's stock fell more than 2% earlier in the past week on Monday, while representatives at the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, or MOLIT, stated they would perform a comprehensive special inspection of the B737-800. Acting Korean President Choi Sang-mok instructed the Transport Ministry to perform an emergency safety inspection of the nation's entire airline operating system. In response to a brewing dispute in the U.S. over H-1B worker visas, President-elect Donald Trump told the New York Post that he agrees with the program. Trump stated that he has always liked the visas in an interview with the New York Post. For highly skilled positions, firms may temporarily recruit non-U.S. citizens under the H-1B visa program. A dispute over the program has engulfed the MAGA, Make America Great Again community in recent days, with one side supporting the visas and the other contending that it permits foreigners to work in the U.S. According to a U.S. official and another person familiar with the situation, Chinese state-sponsored hackers recently gained access to the laptops of top U.S. Treasury Department officials. According to the persons who asked not to be named because the investigation is still ongoing, the hackers were able to access unclassified materials stored locally on the computers of senior officials, which were among the penetrated laptops and desktops. They did not identify which computers belonging to key leaders were compromised. Now in Nigeria, by the end of 2025, the country's President Bola Tinubu has reaffirmed his administration's steadfast commitment to bringing the inflation rate down from 34.6% to 15%. In his greeting to Nigerians on Wednesday for the new year, he made this clear and said, by increasing food production and encouraging local manufacturing of essential drugs and other medical supplies, our government is committed to intensifying efforts to lower these costs in 2025, Tinubu said. Our goal to lower inflation from its current high of 34.6% to 15% is unwavering. Well, we'll be discussing that a bit later in the show. Still on Nigeria, reports indicate that many banks' ATMs in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, are without cash, leaving many Nigerians vulnerable to point-of-sale operators as the year drew to a close. Banks' customers also reported cash restrictions, but earlier, the Central Bank of Nigeria had last year warned banks that they would face sanctions if they were discovered to be failing to disburse cash through ATMs. Nigeria telecoms companies have threatened to cut off service in some regions of the country in 2025 if the NCC, the Communications Commission, does not take their request for a price review into consideration. This was declared by the operators operating under the auspices of the Association of Licensed Telecoms Operators of Nigeria, ALTON, in a statement released on Monday and signed by Engineer Gbenga Adebayo, the organization's chairman. Adebayo asserts that the telecom industry's survival necessitates swift and drastic reform for its long-term viability, and that tariffs need to be adjusted to at least reflect the financial reality of providing communication services. Well, that's it for our top stories.